Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really pleased to have our panelists and our attendees and joining us to learn about the credential engine work and the CTDL standards, which we'll explain in a minute. As all of you may know, this is the GDN Conversation Series, and my name is Joanne Duklas. I'm the Executive Director for the GDN Network, which is a trust, a public benefits organization. Home is in the Netherlands, and we work hard to bring convenings and people together, experts, to figure out together the tough puzzle of how to advance learner mobility towards rapid access to further education and jobs. Welcome to all of my wonderful panelists today, and I'm going to ask each of them in turn, starting with Deb, to please introduce themselves and share a little bit about why they've come to this good work of learner mobility and how they're doing it. Deb, over to you.
Hey, great to see everyone here today. My name is Deb Everhart. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Credential Engine, and I have a long background in what I think of as learner-centric strategies. How do we help people have the agency to understand their own skills and abilities and be able to have credentials that are portable, that are actually useful and meaningful in other contexts? And so that's one of the things that I've always been very engaged in, and I'm super excited to be doing that work with some of the partners you see here today.
So much, Deb. It's excited to have you guys join and learn more about Credential Engine in a moment. Julia, please share with us.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of our colleagues out there. My name is Julia Funaki. I am the director of the International Department at the American Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers. We refer to ourselves as ACRO, as you see in the background, and we are a membership organization of about 15,000 admissions records, strategic enrollment management folks from about 2,700 colleges and universities, primarily in the United States, although we have a number of members from other countries as well. Glad to be here and glad to share about this exciting opportunity that we are working on.
Thanks so much, Julia. And David, welcome.
Thank you so much. David Troutman. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Academic Affairs at the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. You might ask yourself, what's the Coordinating Board? It's the state agency that's over post-secondary education for public 2-year and 4-year institutions. We have close to 100 institutions that are educating Texans and individuals across the globe, honestly. And I'm here, and thank you so much for having me this morning. I'm here because I want to create information and data so that we can get it in the hands of students so it can help them thrive in our society.
It's wonderful, David. And I have a quick follow-up. So you're a state agency, you're government funded, correct?
That is correct. So we're government funded, but we're unique in our state agency because we also have a foundation where we've been able to raise funds through different funders so that we can be a little bit more agile than just sort of thinking our state way of expenditures.
Wonderful. It's good to know. And Julia, ACRO is a not-for-profit member organization, right?
Sorry, that is correct.
And Deb, Credential Engine, love to hear more. Tell us a little bit about Credential Engine to situate the context for our colleagues.
Yeah, certainly. So Credential Engine is also a nonprofit, and our mission is to map the credential and skills landscape so that everyone can understand what credentials mean and what skills people have. So our work serves entire ecosystems, from education and training providers who are designing learning experiences and issuing credentials to those who have platforms that help individual people collect and manage their digital credentials, to the educational institutions that might want to use those credentials or those course records to help someone advance in their learning, and of course employers who want to see what are the skills and abilities of a particular person they're considering hiring. So we work with entire ecosystems across many different types of organizations that touch those different parts of the credential and skill landscape. We do that with data. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes.
And just to help our listeners from around the world and to situate it, in what way do you see the work of Credential Engine and the supports you provide to the ecosystem aligning with the goals as you understand them for the GDN Network community? And you've attended several of our convenings, or at least presented it over the years, but I'd welcome your perspective on that.
Yeah, certainly. To explain that, let me back up for just a moment to explain why Credential Engine exists. So I think most of us understand that the credentialing landscape is pretty chaotic. Our research, for example, shows that there's over 1 million different credentials offered just in the US. And they come from all different types of providers, different durations and costs and quality. And it's really hard for people to navigate how to choose learning experiences and how to get the most out of what they've learned and how that learning is documented. So Credential Engine provides open data standards for everyone to be able to combine data from multiple sources for the purposes of clarifying that chaos and providing credential transparency. And so we see that as just a really excellent fit with the mission of GDN and our collective shared goal of helping people make sense of their learning and have the actual, be able to exercise the right of global mobility based on what people know and can do.
So it's not enough just to move a credential around. You have to be able to move the underlying content around and preserve it.
Right. And understand what it means, right? So for us, transparency means not just that it's in a particular data standard, but that data standard provides meaning that can be transferred from one context to another.
Yeah. And because we have quite a few quality assurance people, not technical people on the line, my sense of it is it's not seeking to change the actual content, the information that's there. It's rather to help move it around in a way that's clear and understood. Is that a good way of describing it?
Yes. So for example, if you're an education provider and you offer a cybersecurity certificate, right? You know what courses are in there and what the learning outcomes are. You know whether it's a 6-month program or a 6-week program. You know whether or not it's been, has accreditation or other quality assurance, or David will get to this in a minute, is recognized by a state agency.
Yeah.
But how do others know that? And so if you think of the data structure that we provide, what it does is it gives a structure for meaning so that those different characteristics of that learning opportunity that then become part of the characteristics of the credential that the person holds are using the same structure so that the meaning is the same when that credential moves from one place or one context to another.
So actually you mentioned David, and David, I just want to bring you into this a bit and say, how are you using the context that Deb describes where you are?
Well, thank you. So I didn't discuss this in my intro, but I have the opportunity to create line of sight for as early as 8th graders, right? So we have to create. So something I heard the other day, I can't remember who said it, but it sort of stuck with me. And the person said, complexity is the friend of the privilege. And so what I want to do is create simplicity. I want to create an ease of understanding the opportunities that are out there and how can we help 8th grade, middle school students to high school students to current college students to those who might have tried college but didn't succeed. So in our strategic plan, we have to produce 550,000 credentials of value per year. So to place that in context, we have around 30 million residents that are Texans. And right now, there's a gap of around, of that 550,000, we're at 367,000. I have to do this within the next 5 years. So I have to understand how we can be creative and collect more data than we've ever collected before, because what we've done in the past was we've created standardized reports of collecting data of the traditional ways of gathering data. Higher education has a tendency to not change with the ways. We have traditions, we have habits, and I really am trying to disrupt those habits so that we can use Credential Engine and other resources out there to understand the sea of credentials and sift through those and link data to understand, are they a credential of value? And what I mean by that is a simple question. Are students better off receiving that credential? Are they better off? Or are we creating an environment where we're creating credentials of harm, where they're leaving an institution with some type of credential, but they're not seeing the return in their investment? And so we've put together a methodology to really sift through that. And so we're working with Credential Engine. We're working with, I lead something called the Tri-Agency Data Group. What that means is there's 3 agencies in Texas. There's the K through 12, there's POSEC, and then there's the Workforce Commission. And I've aligned those data groups together so that we can row in the same direction and use resources like Credential Engine to lift up and highlight what's happening. And then using that information, I have the ability, we have something called OnCourse, which is an academy. We have 18,000 counselors that are both in high school and college that go through our training programs so that we can decipher and make things meaningful for them, because it's a full-time job just sifting through all this. Plus there's an issue with making sure that counselors have the resources to actually counsel and support students as they're going through these journeys. So like I said, I just want to create simplicity through visualizations, through tools, because honestly, I feel so old when I say this, younger generations expect that from us. They live their life through Snapchat, TikTok, Netflix. They want something easily digestible and easily accessible.
I love your focus on the learner. I also love the phrase you started with, and I just want to make sure I caught it. Complexity is say it again.
Complexity is the friend of the privileged.
It's the friend of the privileged. That's a fantastic saying. Thank you. I'm sure a lot of our audience resonates with that. I kind of want to skip over to Julia. And Julia described ACRO, and I know you're doing some interesting things with Credential Engine to help set the context on your end. Can you give us a flavor of what that is?
So one of the products that ACRO has and that we are very proud of is called the Electronic Database for Global Education. We commonly refer to it as EDGE. EDGE has been around for nearly 20 years as a leading web-based U.S. resource for evaluating credentials and foreign education credentials, I should specify that. We've been in this field of international education and research for decades. ACRO started in 1910, and it wasn't long after that we started thinking about the foreign student. And starting in the 50s, we started doing research on education systems. EDGE is a way to take what used to be in books, in print, that could get into the hands of the few lucky enough to receive them, the same information, and to make it available in a way that is dynamic. We can update, we can change things as needed, and really useful, like a partner at the desk for people who are in college admissions and records offices and advising offices, etc., to understand the education system from where an international student maybe originating. And oftentimes that's more than one country. So we have about 240 profiles in EDGE, not just countries, but we have an assortment of jurisdictions in there that aren't even national entities. And it breaks down each profile in a very logical sense with an overview, rating system, an educational ladder, which basically shows the pathways a student might go through, and credentials. And in those credentials, we provide a description of what, briefly, of what that credential represents. What's the level and what it leads to and what it took to be admitted to that credential. That information helps inform folks in universities and colleges, higher education institutions, of how to place students, of how to understand what their education represents and how it fits into the US system. What we are doing is we are really working with Credential Engine to sort of balloon that information and give a footnote, a citing to where they can find that information in the particular jurisdiction where it's offered. It is an aside that somebody can go to and say, I know I have this credential, but I really don't get what it is. I'm not familiar with this system. They can look at the credential, they can look at our description and our advice, we give advice on it, but they can also go directly to the source in that country to find out about that information as well. And all that data, as Deb explained, will be linked. She does the technical side. We do the work with the countries and the jurisdictions to really analyze their education system and lay everything out. So imagine if you're a student who completed a program in South Africa, and after graduation, you decide to pursue further education or employment opportunities in another country like the United States. However, when you apply to institutions or employers, you face challenges in getting your credentials actually recognized and understood. This collaboration with Credential Engine assists us to do that with our students. So we really want to enable cross-border recognition of educational credentials, helping learners transition from one jurisdiction to another. I'm going to stop there because I can get carried away.
You're passionate. I love it. I share it. I just want to do a shout out to our audience. We have people from all over the world and all kinds of different backgrounds, from people who actually do evaluations in their local schools to state or province-based organizations that are responsible for contributing to seamless transfer, quality assurance agencies, systems people, and the like. So quite a variety. I encourage all of you, feel free to ask questions in the Q&A, and I will weave them into my conversation today with our colleagues as we go along, to make sure that we're keeping it as on point for you as you need. And mentioning that, I just want to turn to you, Deb. Help us understand. I mean, we hear these two wondrous examples of where you have partners who are using the good work that you're providing through Credential Engine. I've heard that it's advantaging transparency, that it's helping to bring clarity, that it's enabling ignition work and interpretation work and quality assurance. Can you tell us a little bit about this standard that they're adopting and the work they're doing with you, and a little bit more specific terms?
Thanks, Joanne. That's a great question and a good setup. You might be asking yourself in the audience, so how do we provide a data standard that helps 8th graders in Texas and the person who got some sort of credential in South Africa, and those things are actually connected? Yes, they are actually. And they're connected through the type of open standard data that we work with, which is called linked data. And it's not that complicated. It's just like linking together pages and other resources on the web, only there's data infrastructure to be able to do that in a data way so that those links can be interpreted. And so in order to be interpreted, there has to be a linked data structure that not only creates those links, but helps the information move from place to place. And that linked data structure is the Credential Transparency Description Language, or CTDL. And the CTDL is, think of it like a dictionary of over 1,100 different terms that give us all common ways of describing credentials, skills, courses, pathways, the providers, the quality assurance, the state recognition, the global region. All of those things can be captured using the same terms in the Credential Transparency Description Language, so that, like that cybersecurity certificate example I gave, the competencies that are in that certificate, those competency statements can be shown as competency statements in the data structure, so that if you're looking for skills to perhaps transfer those courses from that South African student to a Texas institution, they can look at the skills and the course descriptions that are in that standard structure to be able to determine whether or not that's a good course to be able to transfer over. Or the duration. So maybe the employer knows that they're looking for a cybersecurity certificate, and they're expecting it to be like 6 months duration and to have certain kinds of assessments and maybe to align to industry certifications. They're not looking for the 6-week short course that has just a participation badge. And so those different characteristics of that certificate can all be captured in the same data structure, so that when that person takes their credential to some other environment, it can be accurately interpreted. There's a lot more detail, but is that enough for now, Joanne? You're on mute.
Thank you for flagging that. There should be more about, well, just getting over a cold, so I'm a little slow. That's excellent. And as one of our colleagues in the audience have asked a couple of questions, so I kind of want to debunk one thing. Each of you are, yes, from the US. We know that. But the work that you're doing and the standard that you're using with Credential Engine is not unique to the US and is not only applicable to the US. And I'm going to use an example of myself. I'm Canadian based, but I do a lot of international research and work. And I grew up in the higher education universe. I have gone into AcroEdge and used AcroEdge as another tool, a resource to do comparative analysis of credentials. And it was to see how the edge would interpret X credential coming from X region. Same way I would use NUFIC resources and other resources around the world. And if you grow out edge by attaching it and using the CTDL standards so that there is even more accuracy, utility, etc., and transparency, that would have helped that analysis. So I just want to make sure our audience understands that, yes, we have 3 US-based colleagues here, but the work that Credential Engine does and the best practices that are playing out in David and Julia's world are not unique to the American context. And maybe, Deb, I could ask you this question, which is a question coming from our audience here. How can you help a region that's not US based to consider using the CTDL standards for purposes which may not result in any students coming to the US or coming out of the US? Can you talk a little bit around that?
Yes, certainly. I mean, I used the example of the South African student coming to Texas to help stitch together the examples that we had already called out here. But more and more, we're seeing that this credential chaos that I described in the US is everywhere. I mean, it's not just in the US. Some countries and regions are much better organized in terms of recognizing all of the different types of learning and training opportunities within their jurisdictions. But even if a particular country or region is very well organized, that doesn't mean that the credentials and academic and employment records that people have in that jurisdiction are going to successfully transfer to somewhere else. And so we definitely do not want to be thinking about this as US-centric or as serving the needs of students coming into the US. I think of this as a mesh that reaches around the world and can touch everyone in terms of providing better understanding. Let me clarify that a moment by going back to my point about linking together data from different sources. When we do that, we respect the sources. So that source, that country, that institution can use the CTDL to, remember I said it's 1,100 terms, it's massively descriptive. And so use it to describe what's happening in that country in the way that's relevant in that country and in that language, but then can be used via this data structure to be negotiable, transferable, understood in a different environment and combined with data from another source.
So if I want to ask the same question of Julia, right? So Julia, you work internationally. You have Acro Edge, you're doing this partnership with CTDL. Could anybody do the same thing if they had a similar edge in their region? And what?
Surely, surely. It could be this, I think of this in lay terms, for anybody who ever watched Star Trek and they talked about the universal translator, right? And so this gives an understanding, regardless of it's from Nicaragua to Bhutan or South Africa to the US. The CTDL is the standard, right? That's going across all these pathways. What we're doing is we're trying to put this into our specific tool that is primarily used by the US, but is used outside of the US as well to understand how we look at things. So I think, I don't want to go on too long, but I think that gives you an idea that this is not something that is just ours to set up and use. This is something that's going to make this information transparent as far as it's utilized.
It was interesting. I'm supporting another organization that's looking at the learner experiential record, the learner and employment record, LERs as you call them. There's different names for them around the world. But basically a credential that's reflecting more than an academic record. It's reflecting the full scope of lifelong learning, whether it was in the workplace or, in other settings. Could be between high school and college, it could be what have you. And they have selectively taken components of the CTDL and also aligned it with other standards relevant to their jurisdiction so that there was a furtherance of that universal translator Star Trek concept. And that's the SALT work that Joshua Mark and Greg Nadeau have been doing. And I've seen that in other settings as well. So I think that point about it does apply to other regions. You're just providing us with some local examples from the US to help illustrate. And David, I want to turn that same question to you because you're focused on Texas, but you must have learners that are moving to other states, other regions. How do you see this applying these standards, helping with that?
Well, so I think first, I was just soaking in what Deb and Julia were saying. I think first, from a simplistic view, it makes my meetings more productive when we're speaking the same language. Because at times we're chasing our tails and someone might have this information over here and some people have information on there. Well, if we're all in the same playing field, we're going to get at a much further distance than where we've been in the past. So I think that's key. I think, in the States, we're very mobile I mean, it doesn't mean that you're going to stay in Texas for the rest of your life. And so we have to think about translating this to other states and across the globe. One thing that I forgot to acknowledge, we adjusted our strategic plan because in our prior strategic plan, we were focusing on younger adults. We've modified it so that now we're focusing on goals around ages 25 to 64. That really is highlighting the lifelong learning that has to take place. You know, I literally just took a course myself to help me think through AI. So we're constantly learning. And so how do I create a space to meet that audience where they're at? So we have something called My Texas Future. My Texas Future is a site in Texas that anyone can go to in Texas or across the globe. And it will ask you a simple question. It will say, are you in middle school or high school? Are you a college student or adult learner? When you click on that button, the website changes the content based on who you are. So we're no longer creating just a general site that's going to, hang on one second, I apologize. Can you hear that construction? Okay, good. All right. And so we're meeting the audience where they're at so we can give them the information they need so that we have something called a career explorer. We ask 6 simple questions of an audience, and they're actually picture based to make sure that we're covering all bounds. And then we can create a list of types of credentials that they might be interested in exploring because we have to rethink how we perform our jobs. What I mean by that is not all students want a 4-year degree. Some students want to take an 8-week course that leads to a certificate. Well, what does that certificate lead to? And that's where Credential Engine really can assist. It's this crosswalk between student learning outcomes and skills from the employers. And how do we merge those together to speak the same language? Because we have a tendency to speak higher education language, and then we have workforce language. How can we meld those together to make it more thoughtful to show what's happening? And then the other end, Deb was speaking of linking of data. I am determined to link higher education with earnings data so that we can give a better line of sight for the earnings potential for a credential, a certificate, an associate's, whatever it might be, that's going to lead to higher earnings so that they can be productive citizens in our country.
So you raise an interesting point. You talk about how using standards, and I believe that these are these open standards, meaning anybody can.
Yes, everything we do is open standard and openly available to everyone in the world.
Yeah. So on that point, you said by using open standards, you were able to have a common nomenclature. So I'm going to throw a question at you. Here you have this consortium. It's a statewide consortium. It's a very big state, et cetera. The big challenge is sometimes not the technology. It's the getting people to think differently in the change. Can you give our audience, because we have people in the audience who are doing similar things in their regions and could easily have their ideas about how to answer this question. And I welcome those thoughts in the chat. But I ask you, how did you get from having nothing to where you are today? Big question. You don't have to list everything, but what are some things that come to mind?
So one thing I do believe in is the power of repetition. What I mean by that is a lot of times I'm not trying to sound pejorative of myself, but like I'm a broken record. I have to repeat myself until someone is ready to receive that information. I look at other industries. I'm going to be creative now. Well, I look at other industries and I think about how they market information. And so one industry that I've thought about are tire companies. what I mean by that is we don't think about tires until we have a flat tire. But how are they marketing their information almost on a daily basis to know that they're out there and they can be present and support them when you do get that flat tire? I want to take that same stance. How do we infuse our messaging and information into our culture so that when they're ready to receive that information, they can act on that information? Because we don't think students, young adults don't think about their career every day.
So unfortunately, David has.
What's the matter? Can you hear me? You can. Okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good. I thought my internet, I think her internet froze up. So we can just keep talking.
We'll just keep going.
Sorry, guys. Froze
Oh.
there.
Okay. You were
We're
gonna
talking
you were gonna
about tires, David.
well, I was just talking how we can be inspired by other industries. So I'm so glad that ACRO's here and Credential is here. So I started my higher education career in the Registrar's office. So if people don't know what the Registrar's office, they are in charge of making sure that we have a student's academic record that's pristine and accessible to students. And that they do a number of things, but that's sort of their central point. But what I'm trying to get at is how do we create information that students can take with them as they go through their journey of their career, that can be supporting them so that it can provide them agency to get, a better job or change careers and follow their passion. Because there is this tension between following your passion and making sure that you have a livable wage. And I want to do both.
Thank you, and I'm sorry that I froze there for a minute. So that notion of socializing ideas, making sure you're always present in the right spaces and places to help build the coalition of the willing, helping people to understand that I'm making a guess here, so you can nod if you tell me I'm pulling threads, helping people to understand that using a standard does not mean everything's the same. It's rather preserve your content, preserve your source, respect the source, and so on. But let's package it and send it in such a way that the other side understands what you're saying, what you're doing, what you're giving learners.
Yeah, I've become a master of code switching. So basically what that means is I can use the foundation of the terms that Credential Engine has put forth, and I can alter that language to meet it to an 8th grader, to a 56-year-old that might want to change their career. So we have to be more agile to do that.
So I liken it sometimes, and I'll look to Julia for this. I think my thinking around some of this is whether you're an individual institution or a broader organization that supports provisioning information to learners, to stakeholders, to institutions and employers, or if you're a verification body that's receiving information in, the better we can get at curating that data and those credentials and that information, the easier, more seamless it will be for the learner to move around. And Julia, do you say that's true for what you're doing between yourself with AcroEdge and CTDL, or would you describe it differently?
I would say that's definitely it. And I think the other word you're probably looking for is that transparency, right? I mean, that's what we talk about over and over again. Like, let's make this something so that it's not as if you have to have the magic spell book to understand what we're talking about. And one of our missions really, really is to make education in general more responsive to the learners, right? And we deal in higher education, but how do we be more responsive to learners who are across the board, just like David explained? It might be an 8th grader, it might be a 56-year-old, it might be somebody who has had 20 years of really specific workforce experience. And how do we recognize that? How do we package that in a way so that it's understood as it is in the cleanest sense? This is what this represents, rather than kind of muddling it up with all the things that we're thinking about. And I see David nodding, so maybe he has an example he wants to give on that.
I think So so I'm a data wonk. I love data. I use it every day, but at times data can control you because it's so overwhelming. And then what happens also is you can go down several different rabbit holes. So how do we create pathways of transparency, like Julia just said, so that people can see themselves at that career end and navigate that pathway? Because what we see in Texas is that students are very creative and strategic. They're going to figure out ways how to navigate. They're going to enroll in 2 institutions at the same semester. They're going to enroll in a semester and then maybe take some type of Coursera course that leads to a certificate. They're going to weave their way through. How do we, you know, create a platform so they could see the forest beyond the trees? And I think that's really what Edge and what Credential Engine and others are trying to do. And then the other thing I'm very passionate about is making sure that students can use their non-credit bearing credentials to infuse them into higher education. Like there shouldn't be a time, and this happens more often than not, students lose credits because they don't transfer into a program of study. And it's almost like starting over sometimes. And I want to make sure that we prevent that from happening. I also want to make sure that life happens, they're disruptors, and a lot of students don't complete. But how can we create an avenue so that they leave with something? What type of credential they could take, a micro credential, whatever you want to call it, that could help them thrive? Because when we survey, and I'll be quiet, I promise, when we survey students, they say, I go to school to get a better job. Full stop, right? I understand that there is a sliver of students now that go for the intellectual challenges and it's making them a better person. Yes, but for the most part, people are going because they want to navigate the workforce, and we have to meet them where they're at.
So these are all powerful, and I concur so much with what you're saying. I want to turn to Deb, and I'm going to invite my audience. Please continue to feel free to feed through your questions. But I'm going to throw you a question that I've often gotten and a question and a comment. The comment has been, where do we start? This is a bit confusing. How do we we're building an environment in our own context that has our own nomenclature that makes sense to our province or our state or our region or our country. How do we, and why should we, but first, how would we start on a journey to use something like the CTDL standard? Can you maybe walk us through that?
Sure. And I would just say the practical thing of start with the problem you're trying to solve and the people you're trying to help. This isn't just, David's a data wonk, and he knows that it can be easy to say, let's just work on the data. No, let's work on the problem. And so, and sometimes the problem is kind of fundamental. So, for example, we work a lot with states in the US, and sometimes the problem is that the state higher ed agency has data in one system and one structure, and the state workforce development agency has data in another structure, and the K-12 and the career and technical education pathways have data in another structure. And sometimes the problem to be solved is to bring that data together in CTDL so that it can be more effectively connected and can support the kinds of tools that David is describing and that kind of code switching. You shouldn't, if you're looking at a listing of higher ed courses, but you're also interested in industry certification that's going to be required for that job, you shouldn't have to go to 2 completely different systems, navigate 2 completely different ways of understanding the skills that are in both, right? So often a fundamental goal, like having our agencies be able to work together better, will lead naturally to, as what I just described, to solving the problem of what individual people need as well. And so how do you do that? Well, you look at the data sources you have. There's almost always some that's there or that you can get from a third-party source that you want to be able to combine with your own data or use to meet your own needs. And at Credential Engine, we provide open source registry technologies for being able to put data into CTDL and have it be connected. And that can happen in our registry, and it can also happen in other systems, literally around the world, because it's linked data. So typically what happens is that we work with organizations that identify their data sources, get them organized and cleaned up so that they can be made available in CTDL. At that point, they become both human readable and machine actionable and suitable for AI tools to use the structured data for analysis. And then those parties either build or buy the systems that use that CTDL data to make it useful for individuals, for agencies, for organizations to use collectively because it's connected together.
So I have
Can I
some,
chime in a second?
sorry, go ahead, David.
Well, so I love what you said, Deb. I think with a problem statement, I would encourage the audience to start with a more simplistic problem to start with. Do not try to tackle all industries to think you're going to solve that problem. You might want to select a more specific, like nursing or certified nurse assistant, like be very specific so that you can get some quick wins that creates that momentum. Because I've seen other states that have tried to tackle it all at once, and it's almost like they're frozen. They don't know how to move. So start with something much more simple or basic, and then move your way up to more complex problems.
Yeah, I would say in my work, that's what we advise, and doing pilots is also good. Proofs of concept, if you will. They're good learning moments too. We have some great questions. We've got a three-parter here. So I'm going to ask Amalia to not touch it and not make it go live until I get through all three parts. Molly is helping us behind the scenes here. But it's from a good colleague of mine, Anne-Marie Lysing, who is board chair of our MOU partner in Canada, the Pan-Canadian Consortium on Admissions and Transfer. We are working with them, by the way, to do a May convening, last 3 days in May at Centennial College in Toronto. It will be a regionally located convening. We'll be publishing the website very soon, where we'll be able to continue some of this dialogue with good colleagues in Canada and around the world about how to do this. Anne-Marie's question. She also represents the Alberta government. She leads the ACAT, which is a provincial entity that works hard to advance seamless transfer in a region. So you can see it's lots coming from this perspective here. Is there a good illustrative example that can be shared either here or via an online link that takes a traditional institutional data file? She's used the example of a CSV because certain schools don't quite have the capacity to provision, say, XML data or what have you. So it gives you a flavor of context, of credential program related data fields, and show how it can be transcribed.
Joanne froze, but I see the question. I see it's also kind of based on how we would help someone walk through that process. But I think it's also geared toward Julia or David in terms of how you're doing this type of work.
Yeah.
So let me, Joanne, do you want to go back to it, or I can go ahead and frame it up that way?
That's fine. I know I cut out a little bit there.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about a real live example based on the problem of people who have some college credits and did not complete a degree, which in the US alone is about 43 million people. And often those people not only don't get the wage gains of having the degree, but they often have the debt that goes into that category of what David was saying of, credentials of harm. So we are very proud to have recently received a grant to do something concrete about this problem. And what we need to do is to get the data about those courses and the learning outcomes in those courses into CTDL. So we can either start with a course catalog that's online because we have an AI tool that can convert that into the CTDL. Or as you say, Anne-Marie, we can take a CSV, we can take XML, we can take JSON, we can take whatever data structure you have and be able to convert that into CTDL so that those courses and learning outcomes then are available in that data structure. Then in this particular example, we use another technology to be able to issue those credentials to people and then have those credentials be able to be interpreted via the CTDL by another institution that could help them continue or complete that credential, and or the AI tools can bring that into employer systems where the course description and the learning outcomes that have been converted into CTDL, because it's now structured linked data, can be used for analysis of matching with jobs. And so that's a very, very quick end to end because I know we don't have a ton of time, but I hope that illustrates it.
Do you have a website that you can share that shows the how-tos to do this? And would anybody have access to those tools within the CTDL, especially as it relates to course descriptions or applying it to the transcript universe tab?
Yes, and I will put a couple of links in the chat. There is a Finder, which is a viewer of all the data that's in our registry, where you can see, literally hundreds of thousands of examples of this type of work. And I'll also put in a link to our transparency page that walks you through the different technologies and how to get started using them.
And I would imagine you have a similar type of links for the Acro Edge work that's going on, Julia. Would you be able to share some of those links in the chat? And David, for your good work as well, it'd be interesting. And Emery, hopefully that answered your questions. I know you had a question about, is there a description of what an organization would need to do to transcribe their data in this way? And she specifically asked about transcripts. Any comments there, Deb?
I'm glad you bring that up, Anne-Marie, because I think it's useful to make a distinction between the CTDL data that is about the meaning of the credential and what I'll call the wrapper or the delivery mechanism by which that credential is provided to the individual. So the work that we do at Credential Engine is not about the wrapper. So we don't, we're not about the technology standards like, open badges or verifiable credentials that are about issuing the credential to the person. But what we recommend is that when you do that, that credential has the CTDL inside. So we're the abstraction, not the specific credential that a person holds.
So I'm going to start with David. I'm mindful of our time. We're almost at the top of the hour. Is there any final suggestions or comments you can share with our audience about your good work?
I think you just have to navigate and go, right? You might just have to crawl first and that's okay. Know that some days you're going to get really frustrated with trying to pursue this work. So I think that's my advice, is just push forward. Remember why you're here. I'm here to make sure that students have more doors of opportunity for them so they can go through that door and thrive. So just, and the other thing is making sure that at times you manage up, you help your boss or your boss's boss or your boss's boss's boss understand why you're doing this work, so that there can be allocated resources to support you in this endeavor. You have to have that support. Otherwise, you'll get very frustrated. I think the other thing that I would encourage everyone attending today is to seek out colleagues across the country who might also be doing this work, and just meet with them and consult with them. It doesn't have to be anything formal. I have a small group of professionals around the country that we've been meeting for the last 6 years. So we meet 30 minutes once a month, and it helps us reframe, well, how are you doing this? And what technique did you use? And so it's helping me and my colleagues be in a better place after we leave that meeting. And then some days the meetings are just a meeting of frustration, and that's okay for one meeting, but you can't have that habitual. Otherwise it creates co-rumination that can lead down a path. So I'd say just push forward, know that it's complex, know that it's ever changing, and just, we have to do better. That's all I have to say.
I think we lost Joanne, so I'll go quickly and say that I think my last comments would be, education is shifting. The world is shifting. Last spring, the Institute of International Education put out their Outlook 2030 brief. And they projected by 2030 that the number of internationally mobile students will grow from 6 million in 2023 to 10 million, with as many as 1/5 aiming to come to the United States. The impact we can make is to support learners, institutions, employers, governments, and other organizations in understanding, comparing, and evaluating global credentials. This goes beyond education, though. This obviously goes to the employment and the career pathways, and we need to think about how those things are different. There's been a commercial on recently that shows a woman applying for a job in hospitality that has 20 years of experience, and the interviewer keeps saying, but what's your degree? And she's like, I don't have a degree. I've done this, this, and this. And he says, but what's your degree? And she said, so I could have a degree in poultry science or fine arts or history or chemical engineering, and that would make the difference. And he says, yes, that's all that matters. And that's what we need to think about. That needs to not be our reality any longer. I'll stop there.
Yes, and those individual skills, if you think 1 million credentials offered in the US is chaos, think about the hundreds of millions of skills that people have and how they're applicable in different contexts, how they were learned in a course or how they were learned on the job, and all different ways also. So if we don't have a common data structure and common tools that we can all share and use together in order to make sense of all of those different skills and capabilities that people have, where and how they learn them, how they were assessed, how they're applicable, then we should expect more and more amplification of chaos. So it's not that hard for us to all come together and say, linked data is a common good. The Credential Transparency description language provides vocabulary for doing that. And let's work together on that.
Having lost Joanne, I'm gonna try, and with your help, you all, and I think Amalia's help, that I know this is the first of a 3-part series. The next conversation will be, I believe, Amalia, if you have this information, please share it.
It's in the chat.
It's in the chat, great. So
Yep.
Joanne, we're bringing you to a close for all this, telling them this is the first part of a 3-part series.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I am in a different country and technology is not my friend. I appreciate everybody joining and I can't thank you enough. And to our audience, thank you for the good questions. Hopefully we'll see you at the future webinars, the PCCAT GDN event at the end of May. And we also have a convening in Oslo in October that we'll be publishing the website for soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.